Alright, I recently got the SiriMoto lower tie bar for my Honda Civic Si, and I've had it for a couple weeks now, so I've been able to gather some driving impressions and just see if it really changes anything with the suspension. So I've included some clips of the installation, which we'll go over real quick, and then we'll take the car out for a drive and see what difference it makes. So the first thing you want to do when you install it is you want to get the car up in the air, or at least the front end. So once the vehicle is up in the air, you'll need to get under it and locate these two bolts here in the suspension. You can see the one there next to the oil pan. Then over on the other side we have another one next to the transmission. Those will be removed, and these are the tools you'll need. A 19mm socket, a torque wrench, and a breaker bar. So you can easily do this with just some hand tools. You can see you need to break these two bolts loose, and it's quite a challenge with my breaker bar here. An impact would greatly help out if you have one, but you can definitely do it with hand tools. It's just kind of a struggle to break those loose, and then once you do, it takes forever to get the bolts out. So I've been struggling with it here for a little bit, and then I eventually just took the socket off the breaker bar once it got loose enough, and I was able to remove the bolts. So they're pretty long and they take quite a while to take out with hand tools, so if you have some kind of power tool to remove it, it would greatly cut down on the time needed to install this component. So once you get the bolts out, you just want to clean them off. I used some WD-40 and just wiped it off with a rag. There's some corrosion on there and whatnot. And then after that, you'll want to test fit the bar. You can see I'm just kind of lining it up with the bolt holes here. And then I started by running down the one on the passenger side, and then I just had to kind of let it hang there while I grabbed the other bolt. So that's roughly where it goes, and it really doesn't interfere with anything that you're going to need to get to underneath the vehicle for any kind of service or maintenance. So that's really nice. And then I started running the bolts down, and once again, if you have an impact, this is much easier, but it can be done with hand tools. So you need to run the bolts down on both sides, and then go ahead and torque them down to 65 foot-pounds. So that's obviously why I have the torque wrench. Anywhere in the 65 to 75 range is fine, and that will work perfectly fine. You just want to make sure it's tight enough so nothing's going to come loose as you drive it. And then that's all there is to it, really. It's a pretty easy piece to install, and that's one thing that I really like about it. So let's get out on the road here and see how this lower tie bar affects the handling of the car. On some corners here, and it definitely feels stiffer than before. It feels stiffer and tighter than stock. It's not a huge difference, but I'm sure this would be great paired with like a strut tower bar or maybe a larger front sway bar, but even just by itself it does feel different. For something that was so easy to install and inexpensive, I'm actually really impressed with this setup. It feels sharper, and when you're going through corners, the steering just feels a little bit more responsive. The car just corners a little bit flatter than before, and like I said, it's not a huge difference, and I'm sure it would be much better if you had some other modifications, but just by itself, this is a great modification, and it definitely does sharpen up the front end a little bit. But there are a couple drawbacks with this. It's harder to feel the limits of the car, and as a result, you get the back end to kick out a little bit under braking, and the whole thing starts to feel kind of twitchy if you're pushing it really, really hard. I've had that happen a couple times, and like I said, it's mainly a result of just not being able to tell the limits of the car quite as easily as I was before. And also, I noticed the ride quality isn't quite as nice as it was on harder surfaces. So if you get on a bumpy road, you really do feel it. And that's just a little bit of a drawback with this lower tie bar install. But overall, I think this is a really good modification, and if you're planning on doing other suspension modifications as well, I would highly recommend including this in your kind of overall package. But you know, if you're not doing a whole lot and you're trying to save some money, this would definitely be a great option to sharpen that up a little bit.